The morning Lorraine Voss decided to humiliate a man in front of 200 people, she was wearing a cream blazer that probably cost more than his monthly rent. That detail stuck with everyone who was there. Not the words she said, though those were bad enough, but the blazer. The way she smoothed the lapel before she spoke, like she was about to give a keynote address, instead of dressing down a tradesman who'd shown up to the wrong party. The event was the Westfield Capital Innovation Showcase, held every October at the Vancouver Convention Center. The kind of gathering where the champagne arrived before the food and nobody noticed, where lanyard-wearing venture capitalists roamed in packs like well-dressed wolves, scanning the room for the next thing to acquire. Startups paid $15,000 for a floor space no bigger than a parking spot. Established firms paid more just to be seen. The whole point, everyone agreed, was optics. Lorraine Voss had attended every year for the last 9 years. She was the founder and CEO of Voss Structural Technologies, a mid-sized engineering consultancy out of Calgary that had made its name designing reinforced frameworks for high-rises across Western Canada. She was sharp, methodical, relentlessly competent. At 41, she had the kind of reputation that preceded her into rooms. People straightened up when she walked in. She knew it, and she'd stopped apologizing for it years ago. What she had not counted on that particular Thursday morning was Miles. Miles Carver arrived at the Vancouver Convention Center driving a 1997 Ford F-150 with a cracked side mirror, a rust ring around the rear wheel well, and a passenger seat buried under rolled-up blueprints, a hard hat, and what appeared to be a child's backpack shaped like a frog. He was 44 years old. He wore steel-toed boots and dark canvas work pants, and a flannel shirt tucked in on one side and not the other because his daughter had called him 3 times while he was getting dressed that morning, and he'd forgotten to check the mirror before he left. He wasn't supposed to be at the showcase at all. He'd gotten a last-minute exhibitor badge through a cancellation. A company called Northbuild Innovations had pulled out 2 days prior, and a colleague of Miles's had passed along the slot like it was a spare hockey ticket. Miles had never attended anything like this in his life. He built things. He fixed things. He'd spent the last 6 years running a one-man structural remediation outfit out of a rented bay in Burnaby, taking on jobs the bigger firms turned down because the margins were too thin or the sites were too complicated or both. He set up his table in 40 minutes. No banner, no pull-up display. A folding table he'd borrowed from his church, 3 binders of project documentation, a laptop that took a long time to open, and a small framed photograph of his daughter, Piper, age 7, holding a hard hat that was twice the size of her head. She'd come to a job site with him the previous summer. She'd spent the entire visit asking the crane operator questions the man couldn't answer. By 10 in the morning, the floor was packed. Lorraine moved through the space with her operations director, a quiet man named Franklin who carried her schedule on a tablet and had learned through long experience to stay half a step behind her and never interrupt. She had 4 meetings booked before lunch and a panel at 2 o'clock, and she was already mentally composing her remarks when she came around a corner and stopped. She stopped because Miles Carver's table looked, in the context of the Westfield Capital Innovation Showcase, like a folding chair at a black tie gala. It was simply and completely wrong. Not offensive, exactly, just jarring. A flannel shirt among blazers, binders among branded displays, a frog backpack among retractable banners that cost more than some cars. A few people nearby had already clocked the situation. There was that particular kind of silence that forms when a crowd senses something is about to happen. Miles looked up and saw Lorraine looking at him. He straightened slightly, extended a hand across the table. Miles Carver. Northbuild had a cancellation. I picked up the slot. Lorraine did not take the hand. What exactly, she said, do you do, Mr. Carver? Structural remediation, mainly residential and small commercial. I specialize in load-bearing assessments for older builds, pre-1980 construction, foundation irregularities, that kind of thing. He reached for one of the binders. I've got documentation from about 60 completed projects if you want to. And what is this? Lorraine's gaze had moved to the photograph of Piper, my daughter. There was something quiet and steady in the way he said it. That's sweet. The words were not unkind exactly, but the pause before them was, Mr. Carver, I want to ask you something honestly. Do you have any idea what it costs to exhibit here? Who this event is for? The nearby conversations had thinned to nothing. People were watching. Got the slot through a cancellation, Miles said again, evenly. The badge cleared. I'm here in good standing. In good standing. Lorraine almost smiled. There are firms here today that have spent 3 years preparing to be in this room. There are engineers with advanced degrees and research portfolios and institutional backing. She glanced at the folding table. And then there's whatever this is. A pause. Forgive me, but I'm going to ask Franklin to flag this with the organizers. I think there may have been an administrative error." The room held its breath. Miles looked at her for a long moment. He did not flush. He did not raise his voice. He reached into the second binder, not the first, the second, and pulled out a single laminated page. He placed it on the table between them, face up, and said nothing. Lorraine looked down at it, despite herself. She almost didn't recognize what she was seeing. It was a structural analysis. The building in question was a 12-story mixed-use residential tower in East Vancouver. She knew the address, actually, because Voss Structural Technologies had been contracted 2 years prior to assess the same building. Her firm had submitted a report recommending a remediation timeline of 18 to 24 months and a phased reinforcement plan that would run, conservatively, at about $3.4 million. Miles Carver's analysis of the same building ran to 6 pages. The laminated sheet was a summary. She skimmed it in the way she'd learned to skim technical documents after 2 decades in the industry. Fast, but nothing important missed. Her eyes stopped, started over, stopped again. He had found something her team hadn't, not a small thing. A load path anomaly in the northeast corner of the building. A junction between the original foundation pour and a 1994 extension that had been documented as standard but was, under Miles's analysis, operating at somewhere between 62 and 67% of its rated capacity. Under certain conditions, a seismic event, a sustained lateral load, the failure propagation from that point would not be contained. Her firm's report had not mentioned this. Her firm's report had not found this. The silence at the table had become a different kind of silence. "Where did you get this building?" she said finally. "Owner hired me 18 months ago. Couldn't afford a firm, so he called around until someone said yes." Miles paused. "I found the anomaly in week 2. Spent 4 months running the numbers before I was sure. Our team assessed this building. I know. Your report is the one he showed me when I arrived. I used it as a starting point." Lorraine looked up from the page. There was something in the careful, unhurried way he said it that she couldn't immediately place. It wasn't triumphant, it wasn't resentful, it was just factual. The way a person is factual when they've spent so long in the company of hard problems that they've stopped needing anyone to validate the answer. "The remediation," she said. "Your proposal, 6 pages. It's in the binder." He tapped the second binder, didn't open it. "I rerouted the load path through an integrated steel sleeve system instead of full foundation replacement. The work took 11 weeks. Final cost was $480,000. She did the math without meaning to. $480,000 against $3.4 million. She looked at him. "You were working alone?" "Me and 2 guys I subcontract, Raj and Dennis. Raj is better at welding than anyone I've ever seen. Dennis once fixed a load-bearing column with a technique he invented on the spot that I've since used 4 more times." He said all of this the same way, not boasting, not performing. Just true. We're not much to look at. Someone behind Lorraine made a small involuntary sound, a laugh that got swallowed. She straightened. She did not look around at whoever had made the sound. She was aware that Franklin had stopped checking the tablet. She was aware that the crowd had expanded subtly in the way crowds do when they sense that the thing they came to see is actually the thing they're currently watching. "Mr. Carver," she said it slowly, "I owe you an apology." Miles tilted his head just slightly, not accepting, not refusing, waiting. "What I said, what I implied, about your right to be in this room." She stopped, started again. "It was wrong. And it was said in front of people, so I'm saying this in front of people." She paused. "The work in this binder is better than work I've put my name on. I don't say that lightly." The room was very quiet. Miles looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. Once, not gracious exactly, something more like acknowledgement. The same economy of movement he applied to everything else. "Apology accepted," he said. He said it the same way he'd said everything else. Like a person who has learned through long repetition to say exactly what he means and nothing more. Later, Lorraine would think about that pause before she picked up the phone to call him. The showcase ended at 5. She'd stayed through the panel, through the networking hour, through the part of the evening where the catering trays were half empty and people were still circling them anyway. She'd spoken to 17 people. She remembered almost none of it. She called Franklin from the lobby once the last of the crowd had thinned. Find out everything about Miles Carver. Carver Structural, Burnaby, and get me his contact information before end of day. Franklin, to his credit, asked no questions. She flew home to Calgary the following morning. By the time she landed, Franklin's summary was in her inbox. 6 years in business, sole proprietor, no corporate structure, no investors, no digital presence to speak of. A website that looked like it was built in 2009 and hadn't been touched since. 3 testimonials, all handwritten PDFs that had clearly been scanned on a home printer. A Better Business Bureau rating of A+ with 0 complaints. The kind of business that shouldn't survive in the modern economy and survived anyway, on account of doing exactly what it said it would do, on time, for less money than anyone else, without any fuss. She sat with this information for 3 days. Then she called. "This is Miles. It's Lorraine Voss. From the showcase. A beat. I remember. I want to understand the sleeve system you used, the load path rerouting. I've looked at it. Your documentation is in the binder I took. I hope that's all right. That's fine. I left one for you on purpose." She stopped. "You knew I'd take it?" "I thought you might." Not smug, just honest. "You're the kind of person who finishes what they start." She was quiet for a moment. She had been called many things in her professional life. Some of them flattering, some of them not. Nobody had ever said that to her in quite that way. Not as a compliment, exactly, but as a simple observation, the way you'd describe a feature of a building. She was the kind of person who finished what she started. It was accurate. She didn't know what to do with how accurate it was. "I want to bring you in as a consultant on a project," she said. "We have a building in Lethbridge, 1973 construction. We've been going back and forth on the remediation strategy for 8 months, and nobody's happy with the numbers." Silence. "I'm a one-man operation," Miles said. "I know. I work the way I work. I can't. I'm not asking you to change how you work. I'm asking you to look at a problem." She paused. "I'll pay your consulting rate, whatever it is, and if your approach doesn't fit what we need, we part ways and nobody owes anyone anything." Another silence. Longer this time. "Send me the specs," he said. She sent the specs. He called back in 4 days. In the interim, she had not told anyone at Voss Structural about the call. Not her COO, not her senior engineer, not Franklin, who knew everything and said nothing. She told herself it was because there was nothing to tell yet. She suspected it was also because some part of her wanted to protect the thing from the weight of other people's opinions before she was sure what the thing was. When his call came through on a Tuesday afternoon, she was standing in the parking garage under her office building looking for her car. She answered immediately. "The Lethbridge building," he said. "The problem isn't the foundation. Our team assessed the foundation as the primary." "I know. I read their report. They're not wrong about the foundation having issues, but the foundation issues are downstream of the problem." He paused. "Can you pull up the original 1973 architectural drawings? I have them, northwest stairwell. Look at where the stairwell intersects the 3rd floor slab on the interior elevation." She had the drawings on her laptop in the car. She'd driven home, opened the laptop on her kitchen table, pulled up the scanned drawings, and found the intersection he was describing. It took her 11 minutes to see what he'd seen. When she called him back, it was almost 8 o'clock at night. "How long have you known?" she said. "About an hour after I opened the file." She sat with that. "You waited 4 days. I ran it 6 different ways first. I wanted to be sure." She looked at the drawing on her screen. The intersection he'd identified was a shear transfer point that the original architects had resolved with a geometry that was technically within code for 1973, barely, at the margins, in a way that only became visible when you laid the structural drawings against the as-built survey and compared them millimeter by millimeter. Her senior engineer had assessed the building twice. Neither assessment had reached this floor. "What's the remediation?" she asked. "Simpler than Lethbridge's owners are going to believe. Carbon fiber reinforcement on the slab edge, extended anchor plates at the stairwell connection, and a partial pour at the base of the northwest corner. Maybe 10 weeks. Maybe less. Cost estimate?" He gave her a number. She wrote it down. She looked at it. She thought about the 3 proposals her team had floated over 8 months, ranging from $2.1 million to $3.8 million depending on scope and phasing. Miles's number was $340,000. "I need to understand how," she said. "I know," he said. "I'll walk you through it. But it's going to take a few hours. I have the evening. So do I." They talked until nearly midnight. She took 12 pages of notes. At one point, he stopped mid-sentence and said, "Hold on, Piper needs something," and there was a muffled exchange, and then he came back and said, "Sorry, she can't find her library book. Did she find it? It was under the dog." A pause. "We have a dog. His name is Parliament." Piper named him. Lorraine looked at the 12 pages of notes on her kitchen table. She thought about the folding table, the frog backpack, the photograph. "Your daughter has good taste," she said. He laughed. It was the first time she'd heard him laugh. It sounded the same way he talked, unguarded, no performance to it, just a person finding something genuinely funny. "She really does," he said. The Lethbridge project was completed in 9 weeks and 3 days. The final cost came in at $312,000, under Miles's estimate. Her CFO, who had been skeptical, sent Lorraine a one-line email that said, "How?" She forwarded it to Miles without context. He replied with a photograph of the completed reinforcement work and the single word, carefully. She kept the email. The project drew attention inside Voss Structural before it drew attention anywhere else. Her senior engineers asked questions she initially deflected and then, eventually, answered honestly. There was a period of about 3 weeks where the atmosphere in the office was complicated. The particular discomfort of competent people confronting the possibility that someone outside their world had found something they'd missed. She'd felt the same thing standing at that folding table in Vancouver. She understood the feeling from the inside now. She called Miles in March and asked him to consult on a second project. He took 2 days to reply, which she'd already learned was his rhythm. Not avoidance, just time. He needed time to run his own numbers before he committed to anything, and he wouldn't commit until he was sure. She'd adapted her expectations accordingly. It was not a quality she usually admired. She was finding, with some surprise, that she was learning to. He came to Calgary for the second project. She arranged a site visit for a Thursday. She met him in the parking lot of the building in question, a 1968 commercial tower in the Beltline, and he arrived 7 minutes early in the same truck, the cracked mirror still there, the rust ring still there. He was wearing the same boots. He'd combed his hair. She showed him the building. He said almost nothing for the first 90 minutes, which she'd come to understand was not rudeness but attention. He was the kind of person who looked at everything before he started talking about any of it. At the 2-hour mark, standing in the sub-basement looking at a section of the original foundation wall, he said, "There," and pointed, and she looked, and she saw it immediately, and she thought, of course it's there. Every time," she said. "Every building has one," he said. "One place where everything either holds or it doesn't. You just have to find it." They went for lunch after. A diner on 17th Avenue that he chose because he'd looked it up on the drive, and it had parking for the truck. They sat across from each other and ordered coffee, and he told her about the first building he'd ever worked on. A farmhouse outside Red Deer that his grandfather had owned, that he'd helped repair at 14 years old, with a set of instructions written out by hand that he still had somewhere in a folder. He'd made mistakes. His grandfather had corrected them without embarrassment, just straightforwardly the way you'd correct a calculation. He'd learned that a wrong answer wasn't the end of anything. It was just the beginning of finding the right one. She told him about the day she'd founded Voss Structural. She'd been 32, coming out of a decade at a larger firm where she'd done the work and watched other people take the credit, and she'd decided one November afternoon that she had precisely enough of two things, enough expertise and enough money. Neither was a surplus. Both were enough. She'd rented a one-room office in Inglewood and put a sign on the door and spent the first 4 months wondering if she'd made the worst decision of her life. "Did it get easier?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I stopped wondering. That was something." He nodded. "Piper's mother left when Piper was 18 months old. I spent about a year wondering if I could do it alone. Then I stopped wondering." Looked at him. "How?" she asked. "Piper," he said. "She needed breakfast, so I made breakfast. And then it was lunch. And then it was figuring out what to do about daycare. And then it was everything else." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "You don't stop finding it hard. You just get better at doing the hard things while they're still hard." Lorraine thought about the cream blazer. She thought about Franklin smoothing the schedule on his tablet. She thought about the way she'd looked at the folding table and drawn a conclusion so fast she hadn't even felt herself drawing it. "I was wrong," she said. "At the showcase. What I did. You apologized. In public. I know. I meant it." He looked at her. "I know that too." They sat with that for a moment. "I want to talk about a more formal arrangement," she said, "not as a subcontractor, as a partner. Minority stake, to start, if you want, or not if you don't. I want your name attached to what we're building. Not because it makes us look like something, because it's accurate." He was quiet for long enough that she thought, briefly, that she'd misread the whole thing. Then he said, "I'd need to bring Raj and Dennis." "Of course, and I work the way I work. I know, and I'm not moving to Calgary. Piper's in school in Burnaby. Her whole world is there. We can figure out the logistics." She paused. "Miles, I'm asking you because what you do is better than what most people in this industry do, and you've been doing it alone in a rented bay in Burnaby for 6 years, and it seems like a waste." She stopped. Not a waste of money. A waste of reach. He looked at his coffee for a moment. "My grandfather used to say," he said slowly, "that a man who builds things that hold isn't wasting anything. The building holds. That's what matters." He wasn't wrong, Lorraine said. "But the building on Robson Street that your work is going to prevent from failing in the next major seismic event, that building has 340 residents, and the one in Lethbridge has 160, and the one in the Beltline will have 200 once the retrofit is done. She met his eyes. Reach matters. Miles was quiet for a long time. Outside, a delivery truck went by. Someone at the counter ordered pie. The coffee was getting cold. "I'll talk to Raj and Dennis," he said. The press release went out on a Tuesday in early June. Lorraine had written it herself, which she never did. She had a communications director for that, but she'd felt obscurely that this one was hers to write. It was 3 paragraphs. The first described the partnership. The second described the Lethbridge project in plain language, including the cost differential, which she'd chosen to include against the advice of 2 people who felt it made the firm look bad in retrospect. She'd listened to their reasoning and then included it anyway, because she had spent too long in an industry that hid its mistakes to start hiding hers now. The third paragraph introduced Miles Carver and described, in the same plain language, what he did and how he did it. It mentioned Raj and Dennis by name. It mentioned Parliament, the dog in a line that her communications director said was unprofessional and that she kept anyway. The release ran in the Calgary Herald, the Vancouver Sun, and was picked up by 2 trade publications and a national engineering journal. The journal ran a longer feature 3 months later. The feature was titled in a manner that made her smile when she first saw it. "The Man in the Rented Bay." Miles called her the morning it ran. "I read the feature," he said. And a pause. "They got Parliament's name wrong. They called him Parliament Hill." She laughed unexpectedly at her desk. "I'll have them issue a correction. Piper is furious. She's right to be." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Lorraine." It was the first time he'd used her first name without the professional context around it. "Yes? Thank you." A pause. Not for the feature. For the third paragraph. She understood. She'd included in the third paragraph one detail she hadn't consulted him on. That Miles Carver had been raising his daughter alone since Piper was 18 months old, and that every project he'd ever completed had been finished on time because, as he'd told her over cold coffee on 17th Avenue, being on time mattered to him the same way breakfast mattered, not as an aspiration, but as a non-negotiable. She'd been worried after she sent it that he'd see it as an intrusion. She could hear in the silence before he spoke again that he didn't. "The reach thing," he said. "You were right about that." Outside her office window, Calgary spread south under a flat blue June sky, glass and concrete, and the distant line of the mountains beyond. 340 residents in the Robson Street building, 160 in Lethbridge, 200 in the Beltline. Numbers she'd stopped thinking of as numbers somewhere around the time she'd stood in a sub-basement in the Beltline and heard a man say there and mean it the way other people meant nothing at all. "I know," she said. And across the line, in Burnaby, in a rented bay that was no longer quite so rented, Miles Carver looked at the blueprint spread across his table. His name beside hers on the header, and thought that his grandfather, who had taught him to hold things steady and get the answer right, and never be embarrassed about being wrong on the way there, would have had something plain and direct to say about all of it. He thought the old man would have approved.